Okay everyone, I'm actually recording this video to make sure that everyone across all campuses have access to the same amount of information and equal amount of information with regards to the final exam. As you can see, these are the slides that I have provided regarding the final exam on the LMS. In the final exam, you will get 7 questions, right? And some questions might be comprised of different sections, right? So your final exam worth up to 60% of your total mark for AIS. Exam will be marked out of 60. There is no hurdle, and data analysis using Excel and Zero are not included in the final exam, and journal entry narrations are not required. The best preparation for this exam is to revise the weekly homework exercises and weekly workshop exercises. Okay, all those questions and solutions are on the LMS for you. So let's review every week together. So question 1, which is about week 2 and inventories. Let's have a look at week 2. In week 2, let's have a look at homeworks and workshops. So 3 main issues was reviewed in week 2. Calculation of or journal entries, recording journal entries for sales, purchase, sales discount, purchase discount, sales return, purchase return on the perpetual inventory system, right? So that was one issue that was covered. So journal entries on the perpetual inventory system, journal entries for sales and purchase transactions. Then the next issue which was reviewed in this week was calculation of the ratios. We calculated 3 ratios, including gross profit ratio, profit margin ratio, and then expense to sales ratio. These 3 ratios are quite important, and you need to memorize them for the exam purposes. You will not be provided with the ratios in the exam, so make sure you memorize these ratios and be able to use them and calculate any required ratio in the exam. Then obviously it is important to be able to explain about the ratios if it is required for the exam purposes. The third type of issue that we covered in week 2 was generalizing GST transactions and calculating the total amount of cash that needs to be paid to the taxation authority at the end of the 3 months time, or when after every 3 months time, right? So that's what we did here. So we had a question regarding the sales and purchase transactions. For the sales purposes, the cost of sale was ignored in this question, right? So same things were reviewed in the workshop exercises. Again, 3 ratios: gross profit, profit margin, and expense to sales ratio, generalizing transactions for sales and purchase, and sales discount, purchase discount, sales return, purchase return, right? And then calculating GST transactions, or generalizing GST transactions. Okay, so these are the 3 main issues that we covered in week 2, and this is going to be your question number 1. Question number 2, week 3, inventories. So let's have a look at week 3 together. In terms of week 3, we focused, I think, on 2 main issues, right? So 2 main issues. So in terms of periodic inventory system, that is not important for the exam. In your exam, we only focus on perpetual inventory system, so you can ignore periodic inventory system for the exam purposes. So let's focus on perpetual inventory system in this topic, and also for the entire exam. And in this week, we focused on 2 important issues. One was for analyzing inventories. Again, for analyzing inventories, you need to memorize the ratios. Ratios are not given in the exam. And so the 3 ratios which are important here: inventory turnover, days in inventory, and the current ratio. So you need to be able to calculate them and be able to explain about those ratios for the exam purposes. Okay. Inventory cost flow methods. So we covered 3 important issues, including FIFO, LIFO, and the average cost method. We also explained how to calculate the ending balance on the FIFO, LIFO, and the average cost method, and the cost of sale. And also we explained why the profit on the FIFO LIFO and the average cost method is different, right? So that's quite important to be able to explain about the differences between FIFO, LIFO, and the average cost method. So usually on the FIFO you have higher ending balance, lower cost of sale, and then higher profit. On the LIFO, if you look at the questions, that they have, on the LIFO you have higher ending balance. You have a lower ending balance, higher cost of sale, and then lower gross profit, right? So on the LIFO you pay lower taxes, on the FIFO you pay higher taxes, and the average cost method falls between the two. So it is quite important to understand the differences between them. So on the FIFO you have a higher ending balance, lower cost of sale, and a higher profit, and you pay higher taxes. On the LIFO you have basically lower ending inventory, higher cost of sale, and lower net profit, and you pay lower taxes. So LIFO is not used in Australia, but again in the exam you need to for the exam purposes you need to understand it and be able to explain and calculate the ending balance, a cost of sale, and the gross profit and the net income based on all these three methods. You also need to be able to explain about the differences between these three methods for the exam purposes. Now, in the exam, if you will be given with such a question, obviously you need to draw tables, including and have columns for every activity that you have, including purchase activities, including calculation of cost of sales and calculation of the ending balance, right, under each method. So make sure you be able to draw tables for these three methods, including FIFO, LIFO, and the average cost method. Let's have a look at the workshops. Again, we ignore the periodic inventory system. We only focus on analyzing inventory, including these three ratios: inventory turnover, days in inventory, and then current ratios. Okay. Again, these three ratios are quite important. You need to memorize them, and the ratios are not given. You also need to be able to explain about the ratios. In terms of inventory cost flow method, as I mentioned, you need to be able to calculate the cost of sale under each method. You need to be able to calculate the ending balance under each method, calculate the gross profit, and calculate the net income under each method. And you also need to be able to explain the differences between these three methods, okay? So which we did in exercise 3 of the workshop, okay? In week 4, we will go through accounting for current assets. So accounting for current asset, in our homework and in the workshop, we focused on two main issues. One was estimating bad and doubtful debt under the allowance method and the direct write-off method, and the other issue that was quite important was calculation of bank reconciliations. Okay, so preparation of the bank reconciliation. So two main issues. One was basically calculation of accounting for bad and doubtful debt under the allowance method and direct write-off method. Now, in terms of the allowance method, as you know, allowance method is divided between allowance method, which is calculated based on net credit sale, and the allowance method, which is calculated based on account receivable. So you also need to be able to understand the differences between these two types of allowance methods. So the one which is calculated based on net credit sale and the one which is calculated based on account receivable. So the allowance method, which is calculated based on sale, is allocated to a temporary account, which is best estimated bad debt expense. In this case, we ignore the opening balance. The allowance method, which is calculated based on account receivable, is considered as a permanent account, and because account receivable obviously is a permanent account and a balance sheet item, and in this case we do not ignore any opening balances in the allowance for doubtful debt, right? So the differences between these two is quite important. If you also have a look at the homework and the workshop exercises for week 4, we had questions in which we calculated the allowance based on credit side, and then we had questions for which we calculated the allowance based on receivable, same as this question, right? Now, in terms of bank reconciliation, it is important to be able to prepare the bank reconciliation. For the purpose of bank reconciliation, obviously you're comparing your company books with the bank statement. In your bank statement, you usually have two sections, including the deposit section and the check section. Deposit is the credit side, check is the debit side in the bank statement. And then in your books, you have different basically items that you have, either the checks that you have issued to someone or deposits that you have put in the bank. So the differences could be because of the fees, usually the bank fees, or it could be timing differences, or it could be results of any error made by you or by the bank, right? So have a look at the preparation of the bank reconciliation as well in this week. And again, now one more issue, GST. We reviewed GST in the assignments in week 4. So for the purpose of accounting for current assets, if you get a question about estimating bad and doubtful debt, GST will not be included, right? So because GST makes it a little bit difficult, so I decided to not have GST included in the bad and doubtful debt, in the estimation of the bad and doubtful debt, right? But for the preparation of the bank reconciliation, again, there is no GST, and make sure you fully understand preparation of the bank reconciliation. Okay, so yep. So let's have a look at week 4. So we finished week 4. The week 6, accounting for non-current assets. So accounting for non-current assets, what did we cover in week 6? For accounting for non-current assets, so we covered 3 issues here. One is calculation of depreciation. GST is obviously very important in this week. We calculated depreciation on the 3 different methods. We also reviewed these 3 different methods in your assignment: a straight line method, diminishing balance method, and the units of production method. We also covered analyzing the sale of a non-current asset, which was quite important, both including GST and ignoring GST. And we also covered issues related to disposal of non-current assets, right? So these 3 issues are quite important. In the workshops, we again covered issues related to calculation of depreciation under the straight line method and under the diminishing balance method. As you can remember, and as we did in the assignment, for calculation of depreciation under the units of production method, we initially calculate the depreciable amount, and then we calculate for the units of production method I'm talking about, we calculate the depreciable amount, and then we calculate the depreciation cost per unit, and then finally we calculate the depreciation expense for the total number of units produced in that year. For diminishing balance method, we don't have to calculate the depreciable amount. We calculate the depreciation based on the book value or the carrying amount, and the book value for the first year is usually equal to the cost, right? So again, we had issues related to sales of the non-current asset, including GST. Again, GST is quite an important issue in this topic. And then we had issues related to disposal of a non-current asset, including GST. And this question was quite important in terms of calculation of GST, and make sure you understand this part of the question. Obviously, it's about cash, the amount of cash which is received include GST, and then you exclude the GST from the proceed from the sale, right? So that's why this question is quite important and tricky. So 3 main issues. Make sure you focus on all those 3 main issues: calculation of depreciation, sales of a non-current asset, and then disposal of a non-current asset. So for all of them, make sure you also understand the concept of GST when it is included in the questions. Okay. let's have a look at next question, question 5, accounting for liabilities, which is week 10. So in terms of week 10, we covered, hang on, just give me a second. So we covered 3 main issues in week 10. One was about accounting for warranties, so warranty or estimated warranty liability or and warranty expense. Then the other one was accounting for unsecured note payable, and then accounting for recording payments for long-term loan, right? So in terms of warranty, we covered that in the assignment. Make sure you you understand the concepts behind warranty properly, right? This is the question that we had from warranty in our homeworks. Then in terms of unsecured note payable, obviously unsecured note payable, as you can remember, we divided that between current liability and non-current liability, and then we calculated the interest on the current portion and non-current portion. So it is quite interesting and quite easy. And then calculation of loans, calculation of repayments or repayments for a long-term loan. Usually when we are calculating the repayments of a long-term loan, we need to draw tables and have the beginning balance, the payments made at the end of each period, the calculation of the interest, reduction of the principal, and the closing balance for every period. So make sure you are able to draw the tables for a calculation of reduction in the loan, and for the unsecured note, make sure you understand how to divide the current liability from the non-current liability here, because usually current liability portion is paid within 12 months and the non-current liability portion is paid beyond or after 12 months here. Okay. For warranties was quite easy. So usually warranty is calculated based on sales revenue. So you need to calculate the sales revenue, and then warranty is a liability when it is basically paid as cash or discharged in any other way. Your liability has been reduced. Okay. So 3 main issues: unsecured note payable, long-term unsecured note payable, warranties, and recording repayment of the loan. So all of them are quite important for the exam. Okay. Then week 8 or question 6, internal control and governance. So the question related to here would be a case study type question. So you will get a case study type question for which week was that? Accounting for liabilities, accounting for internal control and governance, week 8. So we reviewed a number of case studies here, but my advice is that you start from these exercise 3 from the homework, and then exercise 4 from the workshop, because exercise 3 from the homework basically is an example of the best practice. So they are following all the internal control principles, and then exercise 4 from the workshop is an example of the worst practice in which they haven't followed any internal control principles, right? So have a look at these 2 exercises, compare them with each other, understand the concepts behind internal control, and then review other exercises. Okay. So if you review these 2 exercises and understand them properly, then you would be able to easily understand other internal control type case studies. And all of them are quite simple. As far as you are able to understand what is behind the question and what the question wants from you, you will be able to answer them and write a relevant answer, right? So we had nearly 3 exercises in the homework and 4 exercises in the workshop. All of them are quite important, and I give equal reading time to each of them, right? So make sure you focus and on each question, and you know, the allocating of time to each question, right? So the type of question that you're going to get from this week would be theory type question. Obviously in other weeks you might have some type of theory or writing, short type of writing in those questions. I mean, in terms of understanding ratios, explaining about the ratios, and then in terms of in terms of non-current assets, you might have some type of understanding about how depreciation actually works and other things. So you need to be able to understand the concept and be able to explain about the concept as well. So internal control and governance. Then week 11, reporting and analyzing equity. So for week 11, again, we covered how many issues here? We covered 3 main issues here. One was debt financing versus equity financing. One was generalizing share transactions, and the other one was preparing dividend entries. So again, here I prepare each topic equally, and I allocate enough time to each topic. In terms of calculation of return on equity in question 1, this ratio needs to be memorized, and the ratio will not be given to you. I calculated this ratio under two methods. So one is calculation of return on equity based on the formula which is given in the textbook. In this formula, it is required to calculate the basically average equity. So we divided the profit after tax and interest by average equity, which I did here, and then we calculated the return on equity based on the formula which sometimes is used in the industry, and it is calculation of profit after tax and interest based on ending equity. So in the exam, it should be okay to calculate return on equity under each of these 2 methods. But please, if you're calculating for example, if it is given in the exam, if you're calculating the return on equity based on the formula which is given in the textbook, just be consistent for both alternatives and follow the same formula, right? So you're comparing apple with apple. If you are using the industry way, again, be consistent with your comparison and compare apple with apple. So calculate the return on equity for both the alternative A, which is borrowing at 8%, or issue of shares. Now for share transaction, again, we reviewed preparation of the share transactions. Usually when the company is issuing share to the public, usually we have 3 stages: application stage, allotment or issue of share to the shareholders, and then making a call for the remaining capital. So we discussed that in the class. So and then finally preparing dividend entries. In this exercise we reviewed how to generalize basically dividends, which is cash, and then we compare the cash dividend with the share dividends, right? So when the company is issuing share dividend, the money comes out of the retained earning, but then it goes into the capital accounts. So the company effectively company is issuing more number of shares, right? Total equity does not change, only the company issue more number of shares when the company issue share dividend, right? But when the company paying cash dividend, they obviously total equity does decreases. Basically, you're paying cash, right? So your retained earning does decrease, right? Which affect your total equity. Now, in terms of the journal entries, I mean, for all the journal entries, you will have retained earning and dividend payable cash at bank, or dividend payable share capital. The journal entries are quite simple. The only 3 key issue was share dividend, and the issue is that after issue of share dividend, the number of shares actually increases, right? And then a calculation of the total equity at the end was also quite interesting. Okay. Once again, I allocate enough time for studying these 3 concepts, and make sure I equally study these 3 concepts. In terms of, again, in the workshop, we had debt financing issues versus equity financing issues. I solved this question under 2 methods. Both of them are acceptable. generalizing share transactions, and then preparing dividend entries. Okay, so that's what basically week 11 or question 7, right? So yeah, so you will not get any multiple choice type question in the exam. You will have only 7 questions. Some questions might be comprised of different parts. You need to be able to understand the concept and apply and understand the theory concept and apply it in the exam. So you might actually get some analytical type questions in the exam that needs some explanation. As part of your calculation, you need to be able to explain about the concept and understand the concept. So you make sure you understand the concept behind all these questions. And yeah, that's about it. I wish you all the best. And so I actually recorded this video so that there is equal amount of information across all campuses, and all people have access will have access to same information regarding the exam. Yeah, good luck with your exam and all the best. Thank you. Bye.